Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became Superman's Kryptonian successor on Earth. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had a habit of shrinking around Izuku Midoriya. One moment, it was as vast as the sky, filled with the soaring silhouettes of heroes and the endless possibilities they represented. The next, it was the size of a cramped rooftop, a chain-link fence, and the impossibly broad back of the one man he had admired above all others. No, the word was not cruel. It was not said with malice or contempt. It was worse. It was delivered with the tired, pitying finality of a doctor giving a terminal diagnosis. It was a fact, plain and simple, laid bare under the unflinching afternoon sun. "It's not bad to dream, kid," All Might continued, his voice softer now, but every syllable was a hammer blow against the fragile glass of Izuku's spirit. "But you have to be realistic." Izuku stood frozen, his yellow backpack feeling like it was filled with lead. The wind whipped his green-black hair across his face, but he didn't feel it. He couldn't feel much of anything beyond a hollow, ringing silence where his heart used to be. He had run up all those stairs, clung to the leg of a soaring demigod, and poured out the desperate, 14-year-long question of his soul, all for that single, two-letter word, no. The rooftop door clicked shut, the sound echoing with a terrible finality. All Might was gone. The symbol of peace, the man whose smile could save anyone, had left him behind. Alone, the walk home was a blur. The familiar streets of Muzidafu were muted, the vibrant colors of hero billboards and bustling crowds desaturated into a dull, meaningless gray. He passed the site of the earlier sludge villain attack. News crews were still lingering, interviewing witnesses. He saw Katsuki Bakugo standing off to the side, surrounded by a few of his sycophantic friends. They were praising him, calling him brave, a real hero in the making. Bakugo was scowling, but Izuku could see the pride simmering beneath the surface. Izuku felt a bitter, acidic taste rise in his throat. He had been the one who ran in. He, the quirkless, useless Deku, had been the one whose legs moved on their own. And for what? To be scolded by the pros and pitted by his idol. To be an obstacle. He didn't register his own feet carrying him up the stairs to his apartment. He didn't truly see the worried look on his mother's face as he mumbled a greeting and shuffled to his room. He just wanted to be inside, surrounded by the ghosts of his dead dream. His room, once a sanctuary, was now a mausoleum. All Might posters covered every inch of the walls. All Might figurines stood in heroic poses on his shelves. His signature, bold and triumphant, was scrawled across the first page of his newest hero analysis notebook. The room was a monument to a god who had just told him he was not welcome in the pantheon. He slumped into his chair, the springs groaning in protest. He booted up his computer, the familiar jingle an irritatingly cheerful sound in the suffocating silence. His fingers moved on autopilot, clicking on the video he'd watched 1,000 times. "Fear not!" "Why?" "Because I am here," the video began. All Might, in his prime, carrying a dozen people from a burning building, his smile a beacon of absolute certainty. Laughter boomed from the speakers. Izuku had always found it so inspiring, so full of hope. Now, it sounded like a mockery. He watched as the grainy footage showed his hero saving person after person, the symbol of victory held high. Tears began to well in his eyes, hot and shameful. He wasn't crying because he was sad. He was crying because he was empty. The dream hadn't just died, it had been surgically removed, leaving a gaping wound that nothing could fill. He was a book with the final chapter torn out, a song with no chorus. He was Izuku Midoriya, the boy who wanted to be a hero and couldn't. Full stop. End of story. He slammed the laptop shut, the plastic creaking under the force. The silence that followed was even worse. He had to get out. He couldn't breathe in this room filled with broken promises. Grabbing a thin jacket, he slipped out of the apartment, ignoring his mother's concerned call. He didn't know where he was going. He just walked. His feet, seemingly with a will of their own, led him away from the bustling city center, toward the coast, toward the one place in the city that felt as broken and discarded as he did. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It hadn't been a park for years. It was a coastal landfill, a festering wound on the city's edge. Mountains of rusted appliances, tangled fishing nets, and forgotten furniture choked the sands, creating a jagged, artificial mountain range of human refuse. The salt spray mixed with the stench of rust and decay, a smell that clung to the back of the throat. The waves, once a soothing rhythm, now crashed against the garbage with a tired, defeated sigh. It was perfect. A graveyard for things that had outlived their usefulness. Just like him, Izuku climbed over a heap of bald tires and sat on the hood of a rusted-out car, its chassis groaning under his weight. He stared out at the ocean, the horizon a fading line of orange and purple as the sun dipped below the waves. The end of another day. The end of everything. For hours he just sat there, a small, green-haired figure lost in a landscape of ruin. He replayed All Might's words over and over, dissecting them, searching for any sliver of hope he might have missed. There was none. Be realistic. The words were a cage. A quirkless person couldn't fight villains. They'd just get in the way. They'd just die. He thought of Bakugo. Why don't you take a swan dive off the roof and pray for a quirk in your next life? The memory, which he tried so hard to dismiss as just another cruel taunt, now felt like a genuine piece of advice. What was the point of a life without a purpose? His purpose, his one singular, all-consuming drive, had been declared impossible. The sky bled from deep indigo to the velvety black of night. Stars began to prick the darkness, cold and distant. They were just like the heroes he admired, celestial, untouchable, and a universe away. He was down here, buried in the trash. A meteor shower began, a silent, breathtaking spectacle. Streaks of white fire tore across the heavens, burning out in fleeting moments of glory. It was beautiful, but it only deepened his melancholy. Even dying stars got to shine brightly for a moment. He would just fade. Then he saw it. One of the stars was different. While the others were silver-white and chaotic in their descent, this one glowed with a steady, internal luminescence, a pulsing heart of deep blue and vibrant red. It wasn't falling, it was descending. It moved with a purpose that was entirely alien, cutting through the atmosphere not with fiery friction, but with a serene, controlled grace. A low, melodic hum began to permeate the air, a sound that vibrated deep in his bones, cutting through the crash of the waves. His analytical mind, the one part of him that hadn't been shattered on that rooftop, kicked into gear. That's not a meteor. The trajectory is too controlled. The color suggests an exotic energy source, not simple re-entry burn. And that sound, it's not mechanical. The object arced over his head, growing larger, the hum escalating into a resonant thrum. With a final, graceful curve, it plunged into the ocean about 100 meters from the shore. There was no cataclysmic explosion. Instead, a massive plume of steam hissed into the night sky, and the water around the impact point began to glow with that same impossible blue light. The hum didn't stop. It continued to emanate from beneath the waves, a siren's call to his broken spirit. It was a mystery. It was something new, and for the first time since that rooftop door had clicked shut, Izuku felt a flicker of something other than despair. Curiosity. He slid off the car hood, his sneakers crunching on broken glass. He navigated the treacherous terrain of the junkyard, his eyes fixed on the glowing patch of water. He reached the shoreline, the dirty waves lapping at his red sneakers. The hum was stronger here, a palpable vibration in the sand beneath his feet. Slowly, as if being pulled by an invisible tide, the source of the light and sound began to rise from the depths. Water cascaded off a surface that was neither metal nor stone. It was a crystalline, metallic pod, roughly the size of a small car. Its surface was a seamless expanse of a dark, gunmetal material that seemed to drink the moonlight, etched with lines that glowed with a soft, internal blue light. It was clearly a machine, but it moved with an organic grace, settling into the wet sand with a soft sigh, the hum lowering to a gentle, inquisitive purr. Izuku stood frozen, his mind racing. An escape pod? An unmanned probe? A weapon? There were no seams, no rivets, no visible means of propulsion. It was a perfect, impossible object. On its front, a symbol was etched into the surface, a stylized, flowing S-shape nestled within a diamond-like crest. It was elegant, alien, and somehow familiar. He took a hesitant step forward. then another. He was close enough now to see his own reflection warped in its dark, smooth surface. A small, scrawny boy with wide, terrified eyes. A part of him, the part that had listened to All Might, screamed at him to run. To call the police. To get away from this thing that defied all known science. But a deeper part, the part that had rushed headlong at a sludge monster to save his childhood bully, was captivated. This was the most incredible thing he had ever seen. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers outstretched. The air around the pod crackled with a faint static charge. The hum intensified slightly, as if in anticipation. His fingertips, calloused from years of frantic notebook scribbling, made contact with the cold, smooth surface. The reaction was instantaneous. The blue lines on the pod flared into a blinding white light. The hum erupted into a chorus of celestial tones, and the ground beneath him vibrated. A holographic interface, a complex web of light and alien geometry, sprang to life around him, encasing him in a dome of information. Beams of light, thin as a needle, shot out from the pod, scanning him from head to toe. He felt a profound sense of being seen. It wasn't a physical scan, it went deeper. It felt like the machine was reading his very soul. Images, memories, and emotions were pulled from his mind, not forcefully, but as if he were offering them freely. A tiny, heartbroken Izuku, watching his mother cry, apologizing that he was born different. A bruised and determined Izuku, standing up to Bakugo to protect another child, knowing he would be mercilessly beaten for it. A frantic Izuku, scribbling notes, analyzing heroes, desperately trying to find a path, any path, to his dream. A terrified Izuku, his legs moving on their own, throwing his backpack at the sludge villain in a futile, selfless act of raw heroism. The light analyzed his DNA, his cellular structure, mapping his quirkless human biology, but it lingered on his emotional state, on his capacity for empathy, his unwavering drive to help others even at great personal cost. It wasn't searching for power. It was searching for character. A new sound joined the chorus, a synthesized voice, ancient and wise, speaking in a language he shouldn't understand but did. Biological and genetic profile, Homo sapiens. Quirk factor, null. Psychological analysis, extreme altruism. High capacity for empathy. Unyielding perseverance in the face of adversity. Heroic imperative index, 99.7th percentile. Compatibility confirmed. Vessel accepted. The word accepted echoed in his mind. Accepted for what? Before he could process the question, the pod unleashed its true payload. The crest on its surface split open, revealing a core of pure, blinding light. A torrent of energy, information, and raw power surged from the core and slammed into Izuku's body. It was everything, all at once. He saw a world bathed in the light of a colossal red sun. He saw elegant, crystalline cities piercing clouds of crimson and gold. He saw a people of impossible grace and intelligence. He saw a name, Krypton. The vision soured. The red sun flickered, dying. The planet's core groaned, unstable and apocalyptic. He felt the terror of an entire civilization on the brink of extinction. He saw a scientist, a man with a kind face and the same S crest on his chest, pleading with a stubborn counsel. Jorel. He saw that same man and his wife, Lara Elorvan, placing their infant son into a small ship, a tearful farewell against the backdrop of a world tearing itself apart. Hope's last flight. The torrent shifted. He was no longer an observer. He was a passenger. He felt the journey across the unfathomable void of space. He saw the ship land in a field of gold on a new world, under a young yellow sun. He felt the sun's rays on alien skin, awakening something dormant, something incredible. He saw the boy Kal-El grow into a man, Clark Kent. He felt the discovery of his powers, the strength to move mountains, the speed to outrun light, the ability to fly. He saw the creation of a symbol, the crest of his lost family, repurposed for his new home. On Krypton, it meant hope. On Earth, it would become the symbol of its greatest champion. It would become the symbol of Superman. Flashes of a heroic life assaulted him, stopping runaway trains, catching falling airplanes, standing against alien invasions and cosmic tyrants. He felt the immense power. But more than that, he felt the immense responsibility. The loneliness of being the last of his kind. The unwavering commitment to protect his adopted world. The energy wasn't just showing him this, it was giving it to him. His DNA was being rewritten. His cells, once ordinary, were transforming into biological solar batteries, hungry for the light of Earth's yellow sun. The knowledge of Krypton, its science, its language, its history, poured into his mind alongside the legacy of its last son. It was too much. His brain, his body, his very being was being unmade and reforged into something new. Something more, a final, blinding flash of blue and red, and then, mercifully, darkness. Izuku Midoriya collapsed onto the sand, his mind and body overloaded, and knew no more. The first thing he registered was the gentle warmth on his face. The second was the sound of seagulls. Izuku's eyes fluttered open, gritty with sand. He was lying on the beach, the morning sun climbing into a pale blue sky. His body ached, a deep, thrumming soreness that felt less like an injury and more like the aftermath of the most strenuous workout of his life. He sat up, his head pounding. He looked around wildly. The beach was as it was, a mess of garbage and neglect. The tide was out, leaving a trail of seaweed and foam on the wet sand. Of the pod, there was no sign. No impression in the sand, no glowing water, no hum. A dream? It had to be. A hallucination. His mind, broken by despair, must have conjured up the entire thing. A fantastical, elaborate coping mechanism. Krypton, Jorel, Superman. It was the kind of story he would have written in his notebooks as a child. A quirkless boy being chosen by aliens to receive a power greater than any quirk. It was pathetic, really. He staggered to his feet, dusting sand from his uniform. The hollow feeling in his chest was gone, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a lingering sense of something he couldn't name. Hope? No, that was too much to ask for. But the utter despair of yesterday felt distant, like a memory from someone else's life. He managed the long walk home in a daze, his mind trying to piece together the fragmented, dreamlike memories of the night before. He slipped into the apartment as quietly as he could. His mother was in the kitchen, her back to him, and he saw her shoulders slump with relief when she heard the door close. He felt a pang of guilt for worrying her. Izuku! You're back! I was so worried. Are you alright? She asked, turning to face him, her eyes red-rimmed. I'm fine, Mom. I'm sorry. I just needed a walk, he mumbled, unable to meet her gaze. He trudged to his room, the All Might poster seeming to watch him with silent judgment. He felt a desperate need for a shower, to wash away the salt, the sand, and the lingering phantom of his impossible dream. He tossed his jacket onto his chair and started to unbutton his scorched and sand-filled school uniform. As he turned to head to the bathroom, his foot caught on the leg of his desk chair. It was a clumsy, everyday misstep he made 100 times before. His body tilted, momentum carrying him forward in an awkward, familiar stumble. He threw his hand out to catch himself against the wall, a reflexive action he didn't even think about. He expected the dull thud of his palm against drywall. He expected the slight sting of impact. What he got was silence, followed by a soft, crumbling sound. His hand didn't hit the wall. It went through it. There was no resistance. It was like pushing his hand through a cloud of dust. Plaster and drywall disintegrated around his fingers. He stumbled to a halt, his arm buried up to the elbow in the wall of his bedroom. He stood there for a long, silent moment, utterly bewildered. Slowly, carefully, he pulled his arm back. A perfectly neat, fist-sized hole remained, a gaping wound in the cheerful, poster-covered wallpaper. Dust motes danced in the shaft of morning light pouring through the new opening. He stared at the hole. Then he stared at his hand. It was perfectly fine. Not a scratch, not a bruise, not a single red mark. There was no pain. There was no sensation of impact at all. It was as if the wall simply hadn't been there. His breath hitched in his throat. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, thunderous rhythm. The memories from the beach, the ones he had dismissed as a dream, came rushing back with dizzying clarity. The glowing pod. The scan. Vessel accepted. The dying red sun of Krypton. The symbol of hope. the feeling of sunlight awakening something within him. He looked again at his unharmed hand, then back at the impossible hole. A wild, terrifying, exhilarating thought began to form in his mind, a thought so audacious it stole the air from his lungs. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. The star that fell from the sky last night, it had fallen for him, and it had given him everything. The power was real. The hole was an accusation. A silent, gaping maw in the fabric of his reality. Izuku stared at it, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. His hand, the one that had passed through solid matter as if it were smoke, was tingling with a phantom energy. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. His mother was just in the kitchen. What if she came in? What could he possibly say? "Sorry, Mom, I seem to have developed a quirk that lets me phase through walls, except not really, it just obliterates them upon contact." His mind, a finely honed machine for analysis and problem-solving, kicked into overdrive, shoving the panic aside for the more immediate task of crisis management. He scanned the room, his eyes darting from one all-might poster to the next. There. The big one, from the Sunshine Smiles charity event. It was large enough. With trembling hands that felt clumsy and disconnected from his body, he carefully unpinned the poster. He held it up to the wall, positioning it to cover the damage. The smiling, indomitable face of the symbol of peace stared back at him, a relic from a life that had ended less than 24 hours ago. It felt like a lifetime. The irony was so thick he could taste it. His old dream was now literally covering up the evidence of his new, terrifying reality. He secured the poster with a few extra pins, his breath held tight in his chest. It looked normal. Just another piece of hero worship in a room drowning in it. No one would know. He backed away slowly, his eyes still locked on the poster. The immediate crisis was averted, but the larger one was just beginning. It wasn't a dream. That meant the pod, the scan, Krypton, Jorel, Superman, all of it was real. An alien legacy had been downloaded into his DNA on a trash-strewn beach. He needed to know more. He needed data. The familiar itch in his fingers was back, the ingrained habit of a lifetime. He scrambled for his backpack, pulling out his latest hero analysis notebook. The cover. Hero Analysis for the Future Volume 13. Felt wrong. This wasn't about the future he had envisioned. This was something else entirely. He flipped it open, the pages filled with his neat, cramped handwriting detailing the quirks of Kamui Woods and Mount Lady. It was the work of a spectator, an outsider looking in. He wasn't an outsider anymore. He set the notebook aside and grabbed a fresh one from his desk drawer. The cover was blank, a canvas of pristine white. It felt right. This was a new beginning. He uncapped his favorite pen and, with a hand that was surprisingly steady, wrote on the cover. He paused, considering the title. This wasn't just about a quirk. It was about a person, a legacy. Hero Analysis for the Future Volume Superman. He wrote the name with a sense of reverence. It wasn't his name, not yet. It was a title. A standard to live up to. He opened it to the first page. At the top, he wrote, Subject, Izuku Midoriya. Alias, not applicable. Power source, unknown. Kryptonian? Solar radiation? He needed a controlled environment. A place where he wouldn't accidentally punch a hole through a skyscraper or level his own apartment building. A place where no one would see him. His mind immediately went back to the beach. Dagobah. A graveyard for the forgotten. The perfect laboratory. Returning to the beach that evening felt different. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the mountains of garbage, but the place no longer felt like a reflection of his own despair. Now, it was a place of origin. His genesis. He stood on the sand where the pod had rested, the notebook clutched in his hand. There was no sign it had ever been there. He took a deep, steadying breath of the salty air, the setting sun warming the back of his neck. The dream, the memory, had mentioned a yellow sun. He had a theory. He opened the notebook. Hypothesis 1, power is linked to solar energy. Test basic physical abilities first. Test 1, strength durability. He started small. He spotted a discarded truck tire, half buried in the sand. He remembered how heavy they were from a documentary he'd once seen. He bent his knees, getting a proper grip, and lifted. It flew out of his hands and sailed 100 feet into the air, landing with a soft thump on a pile of sodden mattresses. It had felt weightless, like lifting a piece of paper. He stared at his hands, then at the distant tire. Okay. Scale up. He found an old, rust-eaten washing machine. He braced himself, expecting at least some resistance. There was none. He lifted it over his head with one hand, holding it there as if it were a cardboard box. He felt no strain, no pull in his muscles, no fatigue. He set it down gently, his mind reeling. This wasn't just strength. This was a casual violation of the laws of physics. He moved through the junkyard like a child in a sandbox filled with impossible toys. A refrigerator. A vending machine. A tangled mass of steel beams that must have weighed several tons. All of it felt like nothing. He stacked them into a neat, surreal pile, his notebook filling with frantic scribbles. Strength appears limitless? No discernible upper boundary found at this scale. Exertion level 0. This feels less like muscle and more like a fundamental force I can control. As he worked, he saw the sheer scale of the pollution. The beach was choking under the weight of a city's indifference. An idea sparked in his mind, born from the simple, unshakable core of his being. This is wrong. People should be able to enjoy this place. The training shifted. It was no longer just about testing his limits. It became a purpose. He wasn't just lifting junk, he was cleaning. He started organizing the scrap, separating metal, plastic, and electronics into enormous, meticulously ordered mountains. It was a Herculean task, one that would take a professional crew months. He suspected it would take him a few days. The thought didn't daunt him, it energized him. This was what heroes did. They didn't just fight villains, they fixed what was broken. Finally, he turned his attention to durability. How could he test it without hurting himself? Or, more accurately, how could he find something capable of testing it? He found his answer in the form of a derelict industrial freezer, perched precariously atop a heap of scrap metal. Using his newfound strength, he climbed up and positioned himself beneath it. He gave the heap a little nudge. The freezer, a half-ton block of rusted steel, tipped over and fell. Izuku stood his ground, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and scientific curiosity. It plummeted towards him. He braced for an impact that he knew, intellectually, shouldn't hurt but which every survival instinct in his body screamed would pulverize him. Clang! The sound was deafening, like the ringing of a giant, discordant bell. The freezer didn't crush him. It crumpled around him. The top surface dented into a perfect V-shape where it had struck his head. He hadn't budged an inch. He hadn't felt a thing. He pushed the ruined freezer off him. It fell to the sand with a heavy thud. He reached up and touched his head. No bump. No bruise. No pain. He was, for all intents and purposes, invulnerable. He collapsed onto his knees in the sand, not from weakness, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of the revelation. He could lift cars. He was bulletproof. He was All Might. No, he was more. All Might got injured. All Might had a limit. He wrote in his notebook, his hand shaking. Durability confirmed. Blunt force trauma seems to have zero effect. Further testing required. Piercing, energy, temperature extremes? The implications are staggering. Test 2 speed. The next evening, he focused on movement. The beach was long, providing a decent runway. He started with a light jog. It felt normal. He pushed into a run, the kind he used for PE class, which always left him winded and last. Now, it felt effortless. He decided to push it. He leaned forward and ran. The world dissolved into a smear of color. The wind wasn't a breeze. It was a physical wall of pressure against his face. The sound of the waves vanished, replaced by a high-pitched whistle in his ears. The junk piles on the beach became indistinct blurs of red and brown. He covered the entire length of the beach, a full kilometer, in what felt like a single heartbeat. He tried to stop. It was a mistake. His sneakers, not designed for supersonic friction, disintegrated instantly. He tumbled end over end, not with pain, but with a complete loss of control, carving a long trench in the sand before finally sliding to a halt. He sat up, dizzy and disoriented, his socks smoldering. Note to self. He scribbled in his book, barefoot and covered in sand. Control is just as important as velocity. Need to learn deceleration and turning at high speeds. Also, need better shoes. For the rest of the night, he practiced. He learned to control his momentum, to use his invulnerable body to pivot and turn. He ran in sharp zigzags, his feet kicking up massive plumes of sand. He ran across the surface of the water, his speed keeping him from sinking. Then, as his confidence grew, he pushed past the sound barrier. There was no sonic boom, no explosive crack. Just a quiet, compressed whump as he slipped through the sound waves. From his perspective, the world went utterly silent. He was moving faster than the noise he created. It was serene and terrifying. He was an island of perfect silence in a world he could pass through in the blink of an eye. Test 3 Flight. This was the one. The one that separated the heroes from the gods. The power he had dreamed of more than any other. He stood on the tallest mountain of scrap, the wind whipping his hair. Jorel's memories, Superman's life, it had shown him it was possible. But how? Was it a quirk-like propulsion from his feet? Did he manipulate gravity? He crouched down, mimicking All Might's powerful leaps. Okay, focus, he whispered to himself. He pushed off the ground with all his might. He shot 300 feet into the air like a cannonball, a startled yelp escaping his lips. For a glorious second, he was airborne, the city a glittering tapestry below him. Then gravity, that stubborn, universal law, reasserted itself. He began to fall. He flailed his arms, windmilling them uselessly as he plummeted back towards the junkyard. He landed with the force of a small meteorite, embedding himself waist-deep in the chassis of an old bus. He was unharmed, but deeply embarrassed. Okay. Not jumping, he noted, pulling himself out of the bus with a metallic groan of protest. Jumping is just jumping but higher. He tried again. This time, he didn't jump. He stood at the edge of the scrap heap and just willed himself to float. He focused on the memory of Superman, on the feeling of weightlessness. He lifted one foot, then the other. For a moment, he hovered. A shaky, unstable foot off the ground. He was doing it! He was actually. He promptly tipped over sideways and crashed into a pile of washing machines. This was harder than it looked. It wasn't about strength or speed. It was about something else. A different kind of control. He kept trying, again and again. Each attempt was a clumsy, comical failure. He'd float for a second, then drift into a pile of rubbish. He'd manage to get 10 feet up, then lose concentration and drop like a stone. He was beginning to get frustrated when he remembered the sensation from the dream memory. It wasn't about pushing against the ground. It was about deciding he was no longer bound by it. It wasn't physical. It was mental. He closed his eyes. He didn't think about lifting. He thought about being. He wanted to be 10 feet in the air. He pictured it in his mind, his body, suspended in the night air, the moon behind him. He opened his eyes. His feet were no longer touching the ground. He was floating, perfectly still, exactly where he had pictured himself. There was no strain, no effort. He was simply there. A breathless, incredulous laugh escaped him. He pushed the thought, and he drifted forward. He thought up, and he ascended. It was as intuitive as walking. He soared over the junkyard, a silent shadow against the moon. He saw the world from a hero's perspective, a sprawling map of light and life that he was now a part of. He was no longer buried in the trash. He was above it all. Test 4 Senses. The next night, as he was methodically sorting a pile of scrap metal, it happened. The world exploded. One moment, he was listening to the gentle crash of waves. The next, a million sounds slammed into his ears at once. It was a tidal wave of noise, a cacophony that threatened to tear his mind apart. He heard a conversation happening in a high-rise apartment 2 miles away. He heard the frantic, rhythmic beating of a pigeon's heart as it flew overhead. He heard the hum of every refrigerator, the buzz of every fluorescent light, the whisper of every secret in a 10-block radius. The sounds layered over each other, creating a disorienting, painful roar. He dropped the car he was holding and clamped his hands over his ears, but it did nothing. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was already in his head. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the sensory overload. As he did, a new sense flared to life. With his eyes closed, he could still see. Not in the traditional sense. He saw through things. He saw the complex inner workings of a nearby engine block. He saw the steel skeleton of the scrap heap beneath him. He looked at his own hand and saw not skin, but the intricate lattice of his bones, glowing with a faint energy. X-ray vision. It was too much. The noise, the vision, his brain was short-circuiting. He curled into a ball on the sand, groaning. He needed to focus. To filter. He thought of his training with speed and flight. It was about control. He had to learn to tune the dial. He focused on one sound, blocking out all others. The waves. He let the rhythmic shhhh crash wash over him, using it as an anchor. Slowly, painstakingly, the roar of the city receded, the million sounds fading into a background hum he could ignore. He opened his eyes, the X-ray vision fading as he focused his normal sight. The world returned to its normal opacity. He was breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. This power, unlike the others, was dangerous. Not to others, but to himself. Without control, it would drive him mad. He practiced for an hour, learning to isolate sounds. The distant chime of a bell. The cry of a cat. The siren of an ambulance. He was getting the hang of it, extending his range, focusing his auditory lens. And then he heard it. Amidst the symphony of the city, one sound cut through the noise with chilling clarity. A woman's scream. It was raw with terror. It was followed by a man's harsh, guttural voice, demanding, threatening, "Gimme the bag." Now, it was close. A few blocks away, in a dark alley. Izuku didn't think. He didn't consult his notebook. He didn't weigh the pros and cons. The apathetic, broken boy who had sat on this beach 3 nights ago was gone. In his place was someone who heard a cry for help and knew, with absolute certainty, that he could answer it. His legs moved on their own. He didn't run. He moved. The world became a silent blur. In less than a second, he had crossed half a mile of city blocks, a streak of green and black that was gone before the air had time to register its passage. He stopped at the mouth of the alley, the scene playing out in slow motion to his accelerated senses. A woman was pressed against a grimy brick wall. A man with a knife held her purse in one hand. He was turning to run. Izuku moved. To the mugger and his victim, it was a sudden, inexplicable gust of wind. The purse was suddenly gone from the criminal's hand, and the knife was no longer there either. A green flash, a whisper of movement, and then silence. The mugger stood there, his hands empty, blinking in confusion. He looked down, then at the terrified woman. He patted his pockets, as if he might have misplaced the weapon. A few feet away, Izuku stood in the shadows, his heart pounding with adrenaline. He had the purse in one hand and the knife in the other. He gently bent the steel blade into a pretzel and let it drop to the ground with a soft clink. He placed the purse on top of a nearby dumpster where the woman could see it, and then, before anyone could look his way, he was gone, another silent gust of wind carrying him back towards the sea. He landed back on the beach, his chest heaving, not from exertion, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. He had done it. He had saved someone. He had acted like a hero. And it felt right. It felt like breathing after being underwater for a lifetime. He had 1,000 more questions. The power was one thing, but the why was another. Why him? What was the pod's true purpose? He returned to the spot where it had landed, his mind racing. He had no idea how to call it, or if it was even still there. He stood on the sand and, feeling slightly foolish, he focused on the memory of the pod, on the symbol of the House of L. "Hello?" he called out to the empty ocean. "Are you there?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the water began to bubble. The familiar blue light shone from the depths, and the crystalline pod rose from the waves, silent and majestic. It settled on the sand before him, its inner light pulsing softly. A beam of light shot from the crest, hitting the sand in front of Izuku. The sand particles began to shift and reform, rising up and coalescing into a shimmering, life-sized humanoid figure. The figure solidified, resolving into the image of a man in regal, alien robes. He had a strong jaw, intelligent eyes, and an air of profound wisdom and sorrow. The S crest was emblazoned on his chest. It was the man from his vision. Jorel. "Greetings, Izuku Midoriya," the construct said. Its voice was the one he had heard during the scan, a perfect synthesis of tones that was both commanding and gentle. "I am the memory construct of Jorel, scientist of Krypton." Izuku could only stare, dumbfounded. "Why you're real. I am a facsimile of a real man. My consciousness is bound to this legacy pod, tasked with finding a worthy heir to Krypton's hope and guiding them." "Hope? But Krypton was destroyed," Izuku stammered, the words feeling inadequate. A deep sadness flickered across the hologram's face. "Indeed. My world is dead. Our people turned inward, our leaders blinded by arrogance. They refused to believe our end was nigh. But Krypton was more than just a planet, it was an ideal. A belief in the potential for greatness, for good. An ideal that my son, Kal-El, carried to this world." Jorel gestured to the sky. "He became your world's champion. Your Superman. He was the living embodiment of that ideal. But even Kryptonians are not immortal. He knew his time would end. He and I designed this pod to seek out a successor. Not one of Kryptonian blood, but one of Kryptonian spirit." "But why me?" Izuku finally asked, the question that had been burning in his mind. I'm nobody. I'm quirkless. I'm just Deku." Jorel's gaze seemed to pierce right through him, filled with a warmth that was more real than any hologram had a right to be. "That is precisely why you were chosen," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "This world has become reliant on quirks, on the genetic lottery of power. Society judges worth based on the strength of one's innate ability. We did not search for the strongest body. We searched for the strongest spirit." The pod scanned this entire planet, analyzed millions of minds. "It saw your heart, Izuku Midoriya. It saw you stand up for others, knowing you would be hurt. It saw you rush toward danger to save another, armed with nothing but a school bag and a heroic soul. It saw you, at your lowest moment, after being told your dream was impossible, still possessing an incorruptible core of goodness. Your capacity for self-sacrifice, for empathy. Your heart shines brighter than any star, son of Earth. That is a power greater than any quirk. It is the only power that truly matters." Tears streamed down Izuku's face, hot and unchecked. All his life, he had been told he was less. That he was broken, insufficient. Now, the spirit of a man from a dead world was telling him that the very thing society had dismissed was his greatest strength. He wasn't chosen in spite of being quirkless. He was chosen because of who he was. Jorel's holographic hand lifted and pointed to the crest on the pod, the same crest on his own chest. "This is not a letter. It is the crest of our family, the House of El. On my world, this symbol meant something. It is a concept that transcends language and worlds, the driving force behind all great acts of heroism." The AI's voice softened, imbued with the weight of a dying wish. "On Krypton, it meant hope. The word struck Izuku like a physical blow. Hope. The one thing he had lost on that rooftop. The one thing that had been given back to him by a falling star. He looked at the symbol, truly seeing it for the first time. It wasn't just an alien sigil. It was a promise. A responsibility. A legacy. He spent the rest of the night with Jorel, absorbing the tragic history of Krypton and the triumphant story of Superman. He learned that his powers came from the radiation of Earth's yellow sun, which his Kryptonian reforged cells processed into incredible energy. He was, quite literally, a man powered by sunlight, a child of the star. When he finally walked home, the first rays of dawn were painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. He entered his room, the exhaustion in his body completely overshadowed by a new, unshakable resolve. His gaze fell upon the All Might poster still hiding the hole in his wall. He looked at the hero's brilliant, commercial smile, the symbol of an era. All Might was the symbol of peace, a pillar of society, but he was from this world. He was bound by its rules, its limitations. Izuku touched his own chest, right over his heart. He was something new. He was not bound by those rules. He was the legacy of a fallen world and the hope for a new one. His dream hadn't died. It had just been too small. He wouldn't just be a hero. He would be the hero he was chosen to be, and the first step was clear. It was the same path he had always wanted to walk, but now he would walk it with the power of a dying star at his back. He would take the UA entrance exam. The next 10 months were a blur of transformation, a crucible forged between the rising sun and the whispering counsel of a ghost from a dead star. Izuku Midoriya, the boy, was systematically unmade and reforged into something more. His life found a new, dual rhythm. By day, he was a diligent, if suddenly very quiet, middle school student at Aldera Junior High. He endured Bakugo's simmering glares and the confused whispers of his classmates with a newfound, unshakable calm. Their world of playground politics and quirk-based hierarchy seemed small and distant now, like a photograph of a place he used to live. But when the sun set, his real education began. His classroom was the stardusted sky over Dagoba Beach. His teacher was the holographic memory of Jorel. Their curriculum was the legacy of Superman. The first lesson was control. Raw power, Jorel explained, was a crude instrument. A sledgehammer in a world that often required a scalpel. True mastery was in the application, the precise and measured use of his Kryptonian gifts. Your strength is not in your muscles, Izuku, the hologram would state, its form shimmering in the moonlight. It is a biotelekinetic field generated by your cellular structure. You do not simply lift an object. You command it to defy gravity. To apply only what is necessary is the first and greatest discipline. So, Izuku practiced. He didn't just lift cars. He learned to stack them into a delicate, 30-foot tower that a breath of wind could topple, training his focus to a razor's edge. He would take a simple glass bottle and, with a flick of his finger, learn to send a shockwave through the air precise enough to crack it, then shatter it, then vaporize it entirely. He learned the difference between a punch that could level a mountain and a touch that wouldn't bruise a peach. His senses were the next frontier. The cacophony of the city was a constant, roaring distraction. Under Jorel's guidance, he treated it like an exercise in meditation. He would sit atop his mountain of sordid scrap and learn to filter the symphony of Muzutafu. He learned to isolate the frantic heartbeat of a mouse in a wall 3 blocks away, to trace the path of a single falling leaf by the whisper of air it displaced, to hear the molecular friction of rust forming on a steel beam. It was a mental fortitude far more demanding than any physical feat. Then came the new powers, gifts that awoke as his body became more attuned to the yellow sun. One evening, while concentrating on a distant object, a faint warmth bloomed behind his eyes. A thin, red beam, no thicker than a pencil lead, shot from his eyes and melted a perfect, tiny hole through a sheet of steel. Heat vision. It terrified him. It was a weapon, pure and simple. Jorel spent weeks teaching him control, showing him how to vary the intensity from a gentle warmth that could heat a cup of tea to a focused beam that could perform microscopic surgery on metal. He learned of his weaknesses. Jorel explained the effect of Krypton's red sun radiation, how it would render him as powerless as any human, and he spoke of the planet's irradiated remains, the substance known as kryptonite, an element whose very proximity was agonizingly toxic to his altered cells. He was a god, but a god with an Achilles heel. Throughout it all, he cleaned the beach. It was his anchor, his service. He wasn't doing it on All Might's orders. He was doing it because it was the right thing to do. He found a quiet joy in the task, in restoring a piece of the world to what it should be. With each ton of garbage he cleared, he felt he was also clearing away the broken, useless parts of his old self. By the end of the 10th month, Dagoba Beach was unrecognizable. The mountains of refuse were gone, sorted and stacked neatly for the city's recycling services, who had begun to arrive in fleets of trucks, their drivers staring in slack-jawed disbelief. Pristine, white sand stretched from the sea wall to the waves. The water was clear. Children began to visit with their parents, their laughter a sound the beach hadn't heard in a generation. On the morning of the UA entrance exam, Izuku stood on the clean shore, watching the sunrise. The sunlight washed over him, and he felt a familiar, pleasant thrum as his cells drank in the energy, fully charged and ready. He was no longer the trembling, desperate boy who had chased after his idol. He was calm. He was prepared. He was ready to show them not what a quirk could do, but what a hero could. The gates of UA High were as imposing in person as they were in pictures. They were a gateway to a dream, and the air crackled with the nervous, excited energy of thousands of hopeful teenagers. Izuku walked through the crowd, a small island of tranquility in a sea of anxiety. He saw the various quirks on display: a girl with snake hair, a boy whose arms were made of rock, another who seemed to be vibrating at high speed. He analyzed them out of habit, but without the desperate, envious edge he once had. "Out of my way, Deku!" The voice was a familiar explosion of gravel and contempt. Izuku stopped and turned to see Katsuki Bakugo striding towards him, his hands stuffed in his pockets, a thunderous scowl on his face. "Kaken," Izuku replied, his voice even. "Good luck today." Bakugo stopped dead, thrown off balance. He had expected a flinch, a stammer, a terrified squeak. He got none of it. He got eye contact. Steady, unwavering, and completely devoid of fear. It was like looking at a stranger wearing Deku's face. "What's with that look, you damn nerd?" Bakugo snarled, taking a step closer. "You actually think you have a chance? You're quirkless. You're less than nothing. You'll just get in the way and die." The words, which would have shattered him a year ago, now felt like hollow echoes. "Everyone deserves a chance to try, Kaken," Izuku said softly, before turning and walking towards the auditorium, leaving Bakugo standing there, speechless and simmering with a confused rage. The written exam was straightforward. Thanks to his obsessive studying and the Kryptonian knowledge that had expanded his memory and cognitive functions, he finished with time to spare. It was in the massive orientation hall, listening to Present Mic's booming explanation of the practical exam, that the first real challenge arose. "And I, from the esteemed semi-private academy," a loud, crisp voice declared as a hand shot straight into the air. "Have a question regarding the handout. There appear to be 4 types of villains listed, yet you have only mentioned 3. If this is a misprint, it is a great shame for Japan's top hero academy." The spotlight fell on the tall, blue-haired boy with engines in his calves. "Tenya Ida, and you, with the messy green hair." Ida swiveled, his hand now pointing directly at Izuku. "You have been muttering and fidgeting this entire presentation. It is distracting and disrespectful to the other examinees. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave." The entire hall turned to stare. A year ago, Izuku would have combusted from sheer humiliation. Now, he simply blinked, straightened his posture, and stood up. "My apologies if my note-taking was a distraction," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent auditorium. "I assure you, I am taking this with the utmost seriousness. Thank you for your concern." He bowed politely and sat back down. The response was so calm, so mature, that it completely deflated Ida's righteous indignation. He sputtered for a moment before Present Mic took control again, explaining that the 4th villain type, the zero-pointer, was simply an obstacle to be avoided. As they were herded towards the massive gates of Practical Exam Battle Center B, Izuku felt a pair of eyes burning into the back of his head. He knew they were Bakugo's. He could feel the rage, the suspicion. Something is different about him. He could practically hear the thought. The gates slid open with a deafening groan. "Gah!" Present Mic's voice screamed from a watchtower. While the other students hesitated for a beat, Izuku was already moving. He wasn't a blur of speed. That would be too much, too soon. He just ran, a steady, athletic pace, into the sprawling cityscape. The proctors watched from a darkened monitoring room, their faces illuminated by dozens of screens. "That kid in the green tracksuit is off to a quick start," said the R-rated hero, Midnight. "He's quirkless, according to his file," Aizawa Shota said, his voice a tired drawl. His eyes, however, were sharp and focused. "Let's see what he thinks he can accomplish." All Might, in his skeletal form of Toshinori Yagi, stood at the back of the room, his fists clenched. He watched the screen showing Izuku Midoriya, his heart a painful knot of guilt and curiosity. The boy he had crushed. What was he doing here? Izuku rounded a corner, and came face to face with his first opponent. A one-pointer, a sleek, green machine on a single wheel, its red optical sensor locking onto him. It charged, a metal arm extending with a sharp claw. The other students would have blasted it, smashed it, or evaded it. Izuku stood his ground. As the robot came within range, he took a half step to the side. His right hand came up, index finger extended. He flicked. It wasn't a show of force. It was a gesture of dismissal. A single, sharp flick against the robot's metal head. From the proctor's room, the audio feed from that sector picked up a sharp crack, followed by the sound of fizzling electronics. On the screen, the one-pointer's head concertinaed inwards. Its optical sensor shattered, and it crumpled to the ground inert. The room was silent. What was that? President Mike asked, leaning forward. Did he have some kind of impact quirk? His file says he's quirkless, Aizawa repeated, his eyes narrowing. He registered as such at the gate. Toshinori stared at the screen, his jaw tight. That wasn't an impact quirk. That was pure, impossible strength, applied with the precision of a surgeon. Back in the city, Izuku was not celebrating. He was already moving. He wasn't hunting for points. He was clearing a path, his superhearing allowing him to map the entire battle center. He could hear the whirring of robot servos, the panicked cries of other students, the crumbling of buildings. He saw a two-pointer bearing down on a terrified boy with purple balls for hair. The boy was frozen, screaming. Before the robot could strike, a pebble shot through the air like a bullet and embedded itself in the robot's optical sensor. The machine seized up and crashed. The boy, Minoru Mineta, looked around wildly, seeing no one. A girl with pink skin and horns, Mina Ashido, was cornered by two three-pointers. She was nimble, melting their armor with her acid, but they were boxing her in. Suddenly, the ground beneath one of the robots buckled upwards, as if pushed from below. The robot tipped over, crashing into its partner. Both were disabled. Mina looked at the strange mound of earth, bewildered. 100 yards away, Izuku lowered the foot he had stomped into the ground, a carefully calculated seismic shockwave having done the work for him. He was a ghost in the machine. He moved through the city with an almost supernatural efficiency. A low-intensity beam of heat vision, invisible in the bright daylight, would fuse a robot's leg joint. A supersonic puff of air from his mouth would knock a machine off balance. He was dismantling the enemy army without ever engaging in a real fight. All the while, his primary focus was on the other participants. He used his X-ray vision to spot students trapped under rubble, clearing it with a discreet push or a carefully directed air current before anyone could see him. In the monitor room, the mood had shifted from curiosity to utter bewilderment. This kid? Examinee 7111, the pro-hero snipe drawled. He's everywhere. But he's not engaging. His point total is 0. No, it isn't, Nizu, the principal said, his black eyes gleaming with intelligence as he pointed a paw at another screen. Look at his rescue point tally. A separate counter, normally an afterthought in the exam, was spinning like a slot machine. Every time Izuku discreetly saved another student, a proctor assigned to monitoring heroic actions would award him points. His score was skyrocketing, far outpacing anyone else's, without him ever landing a villain takedown. He's protecting the other applicants, Aizawa murmured, a flicker of something akin to respect in his eyes. He's treating this not as a competition, but as a disaster scenario. His situational awareness is off the charts. Toshinori watched, a storm of emotions warring within him. This was heroism in its purest form. It was strategic, selfless, and overwhelmingly effective, and it was being performed by the boy he had dismissed as a liability. The power he was displaying, it was greater than one for all in its raw form. There were no telltale signs of energy buildup, no physical backlash. It was effortless. It was alien. Then, the ground began to shake. A shadow fell over the battle center, vast and absolute. From between the buildings, a behemoth rose. The zero-pointer. It was less a robot and more a moving skyscraper, a Goliath of green metal and black plating that dwarfed the tallest structures in the artificial city. Its single, massive red eye glowed with malevolent energy. Panic erupted. The confident students who had been blasting robots moments before were now just terrified kids, screaming and running for their lives. It's the zero-pointer. Run! We can't fight that thing. Izuku, who had been about to disable a final three-pointer, stopped. He saw the raw terror on the faces of his fellow examinees. He understood the purpose of the machine now. It wasn't just an obstacle, it was a test of character. A real hero doesn't run when others are in danger, no matter how big the threat. "Ow!" The cry was small, almost lost in the chaos. Izuku's super hearing pinpointed it instantly. He turned. A girl with a brown bob and rosy cheeks was trapped. Her leg was pinned under a large slab of concrete, dislodged by the robot's emergence. She struggled, her face pale with pain and fear. It was the friendly girl he had met at the gate, the one who had stopped him from tripping. Ochako Uraraka. The zero-pointer's massive foot rose, preparing to take another step. It was going to crush her. There was no hesitation. There was no internal monologue of fear or doubt. There was only the objective: save her. In the proctor's room, every eye was glued to the main screen. They saw the trapped girl, the descending foot. It was a classic Yui scenario, designed to see who, if anyone, would have the courage to act. "Well, this is it," Aizawa said grimly. "Let's see if we have any true heroes in this batch." Before any other student could even formulate a plan, a green blur shot from the side of the screen. Izuku moved. He didn't use his full speed, but even at a fraction of his power, he was faster than anything they had ever seen. He appeared at Uraraka's side in an instant. "It's okay. I've got you," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. He didn't strain. He didn't grunt. He simply placed a hand on the multi-ton slab of concrete and lifted it as if it were a cardboard sheet. He tossed it aside, where it landed with a ground-shaking crump. Uraraka stared, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But how?" Izuku didn't answer. He looked up. The robot's colossal fist was now swinging down, not at her, but at him, its sensors having identified him as the primary threat. Time seemed to slow down. The other students watched in horror. Bakugo, who had been blasting his way to a high score, stopped and stared, his crimson eyes wide with something he couldn't name. Ida, who had been helping others evacuate, skidded to a halt. This was it. The moment that would define him. The legacy of One for All, the dream he once had, was to smash. A desperate, all-out attack. But he wasn't the legacy of One for All. He was the legacy of the House of L. And their way was different. He crouched slightly and then pushed off the ground. There was no explosion of force, no shattering pavement. He simply ascended. He flew, a smooth, silent arc of green and white, straight towards the descending fist. In the monitor room, Toshinori's breath caught in his throat. "He can fly?" Izuku met the fist, a piece of machinery the size of a city bus, 100 feet in the air. He didn't punch it. He didn't brace against it. He caught it, one hand, open-palmed, pressed against the cold metal. The fist, carrying thousands of tons of momentum, stopped dead. A deep, groaning sound of protesting metal echoed through the city, but there was no impact. No shockwave. All of its kinetic energy was absorbed, negated by the small, 14-year-old boy holding it. A collective gasp went through the students on the ground and the proctors in the room. It was a sight that broke every known law of physics, every conception of what a quirk could do. Izuku, floating effortlessly in the air, looked at the machine. He saw its internal mechanics, its balance points, its center of gravity. Destroying it would be easy, but it would send shrapnel raining down on the students below. It was unnecessary. Inefficient. He repositioned his hands, getting a firm grip on the robot's wrist and forearm. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion that belied the continent-shifting strength behind it, he pushed. It was not a strike. It was a guided fall. He used the robot's own weight and momentum against it. The behemoth's arm was forced upwards, its entire body thrown off balance. With a groan of tortured steel that was louder than any explosion, the zero-pointer tipped over backwards, its own massive body acting as a lever. It crashed down onto the buildings behind it, away from the students, its head smashing into a skyscraper, and its red eye fizzling out into darkness. Silence, a profound, absolute silence fell over the battle center. The only sound was the wind whistling through the artificial canyons. Every student, every proctor, every camera was focused on the boy. Izuku Midoriya floated gently back to the ground, landing silently beside Ochako Uraraka. He offered her a hand. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice still perfectly calm. The buzzer blared, its harsh sound signaling the end of the exam. The spell was broken. The results arrived a week later. Izuku was in his room, the All Might poster still covering the hole in his wall, when his mother brought in the letter from Yue. He opened it, and a small disc fell out, projecting a hologram. It was All Might. "I am here, as a projection," the hero boomed. He explained the scoring system, his voice filled with its usual bombast. But as he turned to Izuku's personal results, his tone changed. It became softer, more serious. "Young Midoriya," he said, and for the first time, it felt like the man, Tashinori, was speaking, not the symbol. "Your performance was unorthodox. It has left many of us at UA with a great number of questions." The screen behind All Might lit up. "Let's look at the scores." Villain points. The display showed a large, bold number 0. Izuku's heart sank for a fraction of a second, a phantom pain from his old insecurities. Ordinarily, this would mean failure, All Might continued, a small smile playing on his lips. But that was not the only way to pass. For you see, we were also watching for something else. The screen changed again. "Rescue points," All Might declared, his voice regaining its heroic timbre. "For acts of pure, selfless heroism. For saving others, for displaying the true heart of a hero." Izuku Midoriya, with a score of 120. The number was so high it literally broke the chart on the screen, the bar graph shooting off the top. "You single-handedly protected over a dozen other examinees and prevented a catastrophic level of property damage with your takedown of the final obstacle. It is the highest rescue score in the history of this academy. Your actions were the very definition of what it means to be a hero." All Might's projection leaned forward, his holographic eyes seeming to look directly into Izuku's. "We have never seen a power like yours, young man. But power is secondary. It is your character that has earned you your place. So, welcome, Izuku Midoriya." The hero smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile this time. "This is your Hero Academia." The hologram faded. Izuku sat in silence, the acceptance letter clutched in his hand. He had done it. That evening, Inko Midoriya found her son in his room, staring at a sketch in a new notebook. "What's that, sweetie?" she asked, her voice thick with unshed tears of pride. "My hero costume," Izuku said, looking up at her. "I was hoping you could help me make it." He showed her the design. It was simple, a world away from the complex, high-tech armor of many modern heroes. It was a durable, full-body suit. The primary color was a deep, hopeful blue, with accents of bold, heroic red on the boots, the belt, and a flowing cape that hung from his shoulders. It was a classic, timeless design, but it was the symbol on the chest that drew Inko's eye. It was an S, but not the English letter. It was alien and elegant, a flowing river of red set against a field of brilliant yellow gold, all contained within a diamond-shaped crest. "It's beautiful, Izuku," she whispered. "What does it mean?" Izuku looked at the symbol, the crest of a family from a dead world, the symbol of its greatest hero, the symbol that Jorel had told him meant hope. He thought of the man he was, the man he was becoming, and the symbol he wanted to be. He gave his mother a small, confident smile. "It means I'm here." The classroom door was comically oversized, a testament to the diverse and often physically imposing quirks UA High catered to. For Izuku, however, it felt appropriate for a different reason. He was stepping through a portal into a new life, the one he had spent 10 agonizing months preparing for. He took a steadying breath, the scent of polished wood and fresh chalk filling his lungs, and pushed the door open. The scene inside was one of controlled chaos. He saw the explosive ash-blonde hair of Katsuki Bakugo, who was already in a confrontation, his feet propped disrespectfully on his desk. His opponent was the stern, impeccably groomed Tenya Ida from the entrance exam, who was gesticulating with the rigid, karate-chop motions of a boy who had swallowed a rulebook. "Remove your feet from the desk at once," Ida commanded. "Such an act is an insult to the upperclassmen who sat here before us and the master craftsmen who built this furniture. Like I care what a bunch of extras think," Bakugo sneered, a lazy smirk on his face. "What junior high you from, Mr. Sticks in the Mud?" Izuku slipped into the room, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. Unfortunately, his very presence was a magnet for attention. Ah! It's you! Ida pivoted with the speed and precision of a military turret, his eyes locking onto Izuku. He marched over, his hand outstretched. Good morning, my name is Tenya Ida, from Semi-Private Academy. I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you, Ida, Izuku replied, shaking his hand. Ida's grip was firm, earnest. Midoriya, I must apologize for my behavior at the orientation. Ida bowed a full 90 degrees, a gesture so sharp it seemed to create its own sonic boom. You clearly understood the true nature of the exam better than I. While I was focused on villain points, you grasped the importance of rescue and heroism. You are the superior student. Before Izuku could respond, a cheerful voice cut in. Oh, it's you! Plain face. He turned to see Ochako Uraraka, the girl he had saved from the zero-pointer, beaming at him from the doorway. That thing you did with the robot was amazing. You just went whoosh and then BM. It was incredible. And you can fly? The classroom, which had been buzzing with its own conversations, fell silent. Every eye turned to him. The boy who got 0 villain points but the highest score in UA history. The boy who had single-handedly stopped the exam's ultimate obstacle. The boy who could fly. Izuku felt the weight of their collective curiosity. He wasn't used to being the center of attention for anything other than being a target. He offered a small, slightly awkward smile. Ah, well, it's part of my quirk. I'm still getting the hang of some of it. If you're all here to make friends, then you can pack up and leave. The voice was a dry, lethargic monotone that seemed to suck all the energy out of the room. It came from the floor. A yellow sleeping bag, resembling a giant, exhausted caterpillar, lay on the polished tile. It unzipped, and a man with tired, bloodshot eyes and a mess of black hair emerged. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. Life is not an endless series of second chances. You are all wasting precious time. Shota Aizawa, the underground hero Eraserhead, took a long sip from a juice pouch. I'm your homeroom teacher. Put these on and meet me on the field. He tossed the UA gym uniform onto his desk. The message was clear. The orientation was over. The real work was about to begin. The field was bathed in the warm morning sun, a light that felt like a familiar caress on Izuku's skin. He felt his cells thrumming with a quiet energy, a full tank ready for whatever came next. A quirk assessment test? Uraraka exclaimed, her voice echoing the confusion of the entire class. But what about the entrance ceremony? And orientation? Here at UA, we're not bound by pointless traditions, Aizawa drawled, his gaze sweeping over them, dismissive and unimpressed. You've all been doing these standardized tests since junior high. Bakugo, he said, his eyes landing on the explosive teen. You finished first in the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk. Bakugo stepped into the chalk circle, a feral grin spreading across his face. He wound up, and with a thunderous explosion that ripped through the air, he launched the ball. Die! He screamed, the word carried on a wave of smoke and nitroglycerin. The ball disappeared into the blue sky. A few seconds later, Aizawa's phone beeped. He held it up. The screen read 705.2 meters. The class erupted in excited murmurs. Whoa! We get to use our quirks for real! This is gonna be fun. Fun? Aizawa's voice cut through the chatter like a knife. A dark, unsettling smile stretched across his face. You think this is fun? You have 3 years to become heroes. You don't have time for fun. Today, you will push your abilities to their absolute limit. And whoever comes in last place will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled immediately. The excitement died instantly, replaced by a thick, palpable dread. This was no game. This was a culling. The tests began. The 50-meter dash. Tenya Ida, with his reciprocal burst, cleared it in 3.04 seconds. A frog-like girl, Tsuyu Ajui, used her powerful legs to achieve an impressive 5.58. Bakugo used controlled explosions to propel himself across in 4.13. Then it was Izuku's turn. He stepped up to the starting line. He could cross the distance in less than a microsecond, but that would raise too many questions, cause too much panic. control, discipline. He needed to be impressive, but not impossible. The starting pistol fired. Izuku moved. He didn't create a sonic boom. He didn't become a blur. He just ran. But his stride was unnaturally long, his form perfect. He crossed the line, and the sensor beeped. Aizawa looked at the time. 1.02 seconds. It was a time that shattered the human world record by a factor of 8, yet it had looked almost casual. The class stared, mouths agape. How is that possible? Someone whispered. His quirk must be some kind of super speed enhancement. Next came the grip strength test. Izuku picked up the device. He remembered Jorel's lessons on control. He squeezed. He didn't want to break the machine, just max it out. The digital display raced upwards, the numbers a blur, before the device let out a strained crack and the screen went blank, displaying only an error message. Aizawa took the broken device from him without a word, his expression unreadable. The standing long jump. He cleared the entire sandpit with a light hop. The seated toe touch. He bent as if he had no spine. In every single test, Izuku didn't just excel. He redefined the parameters of the possible. He broke every record, and he did it all with a calm, focused demeanor that was more unnerving than any boastful display of power. Finally, it was his turn for the softball throw. He stepped into the circle, the small, hard ball feeling absurdly light in his hand. He could throw it into orbit. He could throw it hard enough to achieve escape velocity, and send it on a journey to another star system. But that wasn't the point. He took a deep breath, focusing his energy. He wound his arm back, not for a throw, but for a punch. He didn't throw the ball. He punched the air behind the ball. The motion was a blur. His fist stopped a millimeter from his open palm where the ball was resting. The sound came a split second later. A thunderclap. A compressed cannon blast of air that ripped out from his fist. The ball was shot from his hand as if fired from a railgun, a white speck that vanished into the stratosphere. The shockwave from his punch kicked up a cloud of dust and sent a ripple through the air that flattened the grass for 50 feet. The entire class was knocked back a step, their hair and clothes whipped by the sudden gale. They stared at him, their expressions a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a dawning, primal fear. Bakugo's face was a mask of incandescent fury. His jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might shatter. This was impossible. Deku was a pebble. A worthless, quirkless bug he had spent his entire life squashing under his heel. But this was not Deku. This was a monster wearing his face. Aizawa's phone beeped. He stared at it for a long, silent moment. Then, without looking up, he held it out for the class to see. The screen wasn't displaying a number. It was displaying a symbol, an infinity sign, infinity. The class was silent. The concept of powerful had been stretched to its breaking point, and had snapped. What they were witnessing was something beyond a quirk. It was absolute. His quirk registration simply says solar battery, Aizawa said, his voice quiet but carrying across the stunned field. It states he can absorb solar radiation and convert it into a variety of superhuman abilities. An open-ended quirk with a seemingly limitless power source. An unforeseen variable. He finally looked at Izuku, his usual apathy replaced by an intense, analytical scrutiny. Midoriya. What is your limit? Izuku met his teacher's gaze. I don't know, he said honestly. I haven't found it yet. The rest of the tests were a formality. When the final scores were displayed, Izuku's name was at the top of the list, so far ahead of second place, Momo Yayorozu, that it was in a category of its own. Last place was Minoru Mineta, who was sobbing uncontrollably. And by the way, Aizawa said, a cruel grin spreading across his face as he powered down the scoreboard. I was lying about the expulsion. It was a logical deception to make you push yourselves. The class erupted in relieved cries, except for Yayorozu, who calmly explained that of course it was a lie, as it would be illogical to expel a student on the first day. But as the class began to head back to the locker rooms, Bakugo stalked towards Izuku, his hands sparking. DKU! He roared, his voice cracking with rage. You goddamn liar! You've had this quirk the whole time, haven't you? You've been looking down on me. Laughing at me all these years. He lunged, his right hand arcing through the air, ready to unleash a massive explosion in Izuku's face. Before his hand could even connect, a gray scarf shot out and wrapped around Bakugo, constricting him. His explosion sputtered and died. Aizawa stood a few feet away, his hair floating, his eyes glowing a menacing red. "Stand down, Bakugo," he commanded, his voice cold. "Attacking a classmate is grounds for expulsion, and that is not a deception." "Midoriya, your explanation." Izuku looked at Bakugo's struggling form, at the pure, undiluted rage in his eyes. He saw not just anger, but a deep, gnawing insecurity. Bakugo's entire worldview, built on the foundation of his own superiority, had just been demolished. "My quirk only manifested recently, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice soft but firm. "It was dormant my whole life. I didn't lie to you. I couldn't. It was a partial truth, a simplified version of a story too fantastical to tell. But it was believable in a world of spontaneous quirk awakenings. It was an explanation, but for Bakugo, it was an unacceptable one." Aizawa released him, and he stood there, trembling with a fury that had no outlet. He just stared at Izuku, his promise of violence hanging unspoken in the air. The first combat training exercise was the climax of a tense day. All Might, in his magnificent Bronze Age costume, announced the trial, an indoor battle, heroes versus villains. Izuku was paired with Ochako Uraraka, the girl whose quirk, zero gravity, was a gentle foil to his own absolute power. Their opponents, chosen by lottery, were inevitable. The universe seemed to demand it. They would be facing Tenya Ida and Katsuki Bakugo. "The villains will have 5 minutes to hide a fake nuclear weapon within the building," All Might explained. "The heroes will then have 10 minutes to either capture the weapon or capture both villains. Now, teams, prepare for battle." As they waited for the signal to start, Uraraka turned to him, her face a little pale. "Okay, Midoriya, what's the plan? We're up against Bakugo, and Ida is super fast. We need a strategy." Izuku held a hand to his ear, his eyes closed. "The bomb is on the 5th floor, he said calmly. "Northwest corner of the building. Ida is guarding it directly. Bakugo isn't with him. He's waiting to ambush us, just around the corner from the main entrance on the 1st floor. Uraraka stared at him. How can you possibly know that?" "My quirk," Izuku said, tapping his temple. "Enhanced senses are part of the package. I can hear their heartbeats, their footsteps. I can see through the walls." He offered her a reassuring smile. "Here's the plan. It's very simple. You're the hero. You're going to capture the bomb. I'm just going to clear the way." The buzzer sounded. "Hero team, go!" They entered the building. "He's just around this corner," Izuku whispered. "Stay behind me." As they rounded the bend, Bakugo sprang from the shadows, a predator unleashed. His right hand was already sparking, his face a mask of sadistic glee. "I've got you now, you damn deck!" He never finished the word. One moment, he was lunging. The next, a gust of wind slammed into him. Izuku hadn't moved a visible muscle, he had simply exhaled. A controlled, supersonic puff of air that hit Bakugo like a physical blow, sending him staggering back. Before he could recover, Izuku was on him. It wasn't a fight. It was a disassembly. Izuku moved in a fluid, untouchable dance. He sidestepped a wide, explosive swing, his hand gently tapping Bakugo's elbow, redirecting the blast into the ceiling. He ducked under a left hook, his fingers brushing against Bakugo's gauntlet, and with a precise application of force, unlatched it from his arm. It clattered to the floor. "Damn you! Stand still and fight me!" Bakugo roared, his frustration mounting with every missed attack. "I don't want to fight you, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice laced with a sadness that infuriated Bakugo even more. "I don't want to hurt you." He saw Bakugo reach for the pin on his remaining gauntlet. "Young Bakugo, don't! You'll kill him!" All Might's voice yelled through the comms. "He won't die if he dodges!" Bakugo screamed, pulling the pin. A torrent of destructive energy, a massive, building-shaking explosion, erupted from the gauntlet. Smoke and fire filled the hallway. In the monitor room, the other students gasped in horror. When the smoke cleared, Izuku was standing in the exact same spot. He hadn't moved. The wall behind him was blackened and cratered, but he was completely unharmed, a thin layer of superheated air shimmering around his body, the only sign of the incredible heat he had just endured. He hadn't dodged. He had simply taken it. Bakugo's eyes were wide with disbelief. He had put everything into that attack. His ultimate move. And it had done nothing. It's over, Kaken. Izuku moved. He was a blur, closing the distance in a nanosecond. One hand gently cupped the back of Bakugo's neck. The other tapped a pressure point on his shoulder. Bakugo's body went rigid, then slumped, his eyes rolling back as he lost consciousness. Izuku caught him before he hit the floor, laying him gently on the ground. He then looked at Uraraka, who had been watching the entire exchange with a look of terrified wonder. "5th floor. Go," he said. He turned his attention upwards. With his X-ray vision, he saw Ida, who had heard the explosion and was now barricading the door, playing his villainous role with theatrical zeal. Izuku smiled faintly. He crouched and leaped. He didn't smash through the floors. That was crude. He shot up through the building like a rocket, phasing through the concrete and steel by vibrating his molecules at a superspeed frequency he had learned from one of Jorel's physics lessons. He materialized in the bomb room, a silent ghost appearing out of thin air behind the still monologuing Ida. "For you see, a true villain is always prepared. Your feeble attempts are useless. You've played your part well, Ida," Izuku said calmly. Ida shrieked and spun around, his eyes wide. "Midoriya! How did you get in here?" "The front door," Izuku said with a straight face. He then walked past the stunned Ida, touched the papier-mâché bomb, and said into his comms, "Hero Team has secured the weapon." The silence in the monitor room was deafening. All Might stood frozen, his ever-present smile gone, replaced by a look of profound shock. The other students were speechless. They had just witnessed the complete and utter dismantling of two of the strongest students in their class. The exercise had been scheduled for 10 minutes. Izuku had won it in 94 seconds. He neutralized Bakugo without injuring him, Momo Yayorozu whispered, her analytical mind struggling to process what she had seen. And he completely bypassed Ida's defenses. His combination of power, speed, and strategy is flawless. When Izuku and Uraraka returned to the monitor room, the atmosphere was thick with a new kind of respect, one tinged with a healthy dose of fear. Bakugo was already awake, sitting in the corner, staring at his hands, a broken look in his eyes. He hadn't just been beaten. He had been rendered irrelevant. All Might cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the lesson. "Why, young Midoriya is the MVP of this exercise," he declared, his voice lacking its usual boom. "Can anyone tell me why?" Yayorozu raised her hand. Because he was the only one who perfectly embodied his role. He adapted to the situation, formulated a plan that minimized damage and risk, and executed it with terrifying efficiency. He treated his opponent with respect by neutralizing him without unnecessary violence, and he never lost sight of the objective. It was a perfect victory. The praise felt strange to Izuku. He had just done what was logical. Why would he hurt Kaken when he didn't have to? Why would he destroy the building when he could simply pass through it? The powers were a gift, but it was his mind, the same analytical mind that had filled 13 notebooks, that had won the battle. Later that day, as he was packing his bag to go home, All Might appeared at the classroom door, beckoning him with a long, skeletal finger. They stood in an empty hallway, the setting sun casting long shadows. "Young Midoriya," All Might began, his voice low and serious. "I owe you an apology. On that rooftop, I was wrong. I was blind. I let my own limitations define the potential of others." He looked at Izuku, his sunken eyes filled with a deep, searching curiosity. "I have never seen a quirk like yours. It defies all known categories. It operates on a level I didn't think was possible. Where did it come from?" Izuku looked at the man before him. Not the symbol of peace, but Toshinori Yagi. A man with a great power, a great burden, and a great heart. Jorel had told him to be cautious, but Izuku's own heroic imperative, the one the pod had found so compelling, told him that this man was worthy of trust. "It's not a quirk, All Might," Izuku said, his voice barely a whisper. Not really. He couldn't tell him everything. Not yet. The world wasn't ready for Krypton. But he could offer a piece of the truth. There was an incident. 10 months ago, on the same day I met you. A kind of accident. A meteor fell. He chose his words carefully. It didn't just hit me. It changed me. It unlocked this. All Might listened intently, his expression unreadable. He sensed there was more to the story, a depth that the boy wasn't revealing. But he also sensed the truth in his words. This wasn't a power that had been hidden. It was one that had been received. I see, Toshinori said, nodding slowly. A freak accident. A 1 in a billion chance that gave you this gift. He placed a heavy hand on Izuku's shoulder. Whatever its origin, you are wielding it with the heart of a true hero. I will be watching you, young Midoriya. I believe you are destined for great things. As Izuku walked away, All Might leaned against the wall, a thoughtful, worried expression on his face. This boy's power was a paradigm shift. It was a power that could change the world, for good or for ill. He was not a successor. He was a replacement. A new kind of symbol for a new age. And Toshinori, for the first time in a long time, felt a sense of both profound hope and deep-seated fear. The next day, Class 1A boarded a bus, heading for off-campus rescue training at the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ. The mood was light, the students buzzing with excitement. Hey, Midoriya! Called a cheerful, blocky voice. It was Eijiro Kirishima, the redhead whose quirk allowed him to harden his skin. That quirk of yours is insane, man. So flashy and powerful. You're like a one-man army, Izuku smiled. Thanks, Kirishima. Yours is really cool, too. Your defense is amazing. The conversation turned to quirks, the students chattering about their abilities. Tsuyu Ajiri, the frog girl, turned her large, placid eyes on Izuku. Midoriya, she said, her voice a frank, curious croak. Your quirk seems a lot like All Might's in terms of pure power. Izuku felt a prickle of sweat on his neck. Oh, you think so? I don't know about that. But there's a difference, she continued, tilting her head. All Might always gets hurt when he overdoes it. We see it on the news. But you seem to have no backlash at all. You took Bakugo's giant explosion and didn't even flinch. It makes me wonder. She looked him directly in the eye, her question simple and piercing. Do you have a limit? The entire bus seemed to quiet down, everyone listening for his answer. It was the question on everyone's mind. The question Aizawa had asked? The question that defined him. Izuku turned his head and looked out the window. The sun was bright, a brilliant golden orb in a cloudless sky. He felt its rays on his skin, a constant, life-giving stream of near-infinite energy. He thought of Jorel, of the endless power of a main-sequence star, of the legacy he now carried. He thought about the infinity symbol on Aizawa's phone. He turned back to Tsuyu, his expression serene and his voice completely honest. I don't know, he said. I don't know if I have one.